We decided to rent out your room, my grandson said. What he didn't know was, I'd already rented their future. While they handed me the den like a leftover, I was signing documents that would make them tenants in a house they thought they owned. They saw me as quiet, convenient, forgettable. But I've always believed in interest, and they were long overdue. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. It started with the sound of silverware on porcelain, that delicate, practiced clink that always seemed louder when no one was talking. The kind of silence that doesn't happen by accident. I'd learned to recognize it over the years. The pause before someone says something they've already rehearsed. Lori set down her wine glass with the kind of smile that looks like good manners but feels like a curtain about to drop. We've been doing some rearranging, she said brightly, glancing at David, who didn't look up from his plate. You know how we've been talking about giving Ethan more space for his art projects? Ethan grinned, 17 and completely unaware of the storm he was about to stir. We decided to rent out your room, Grandma. You can take the den. It'll be cozy. The fork froze halfway to my mouth. I remember the air changing, thickening somehow, as if the walls themselves needed a second to understand what had just been said. David cleared his throat. It's temporary, Mom. Ethan needs a workspace. And you've always said the den was quiet. It's only fair he has somewhere to grow. I nodded slowly, my face arranging itself into something polite. Of course, I said. Growth is important. Inside, I felt the tiniest shift. Not anger exactly, but a stillness. Like a nurse preparing a sterile field before surgery. You don't rush it, you just make sure the instruments are sharp. Lori seemed relieved by my composure. You're such a sport, Maggie. We'll help move your things tomorrow. I smiled faintly, folding my napkin. No rush. I travel light these days. Dinner went on, or at least plates were moved, and words floated by that I couldn't quite catch. My husband used to say that some humiliations arrive dressed as opportunities. I finally knew what he meant. When the dishes were done, I stayed behind in the kitchen, rinsing plates one by one under the warm water. The smell of lemon soap mixed with the faint perfume Lori always wore. Something expensive, designed to smell effortless. Upstairs, Ethan's laughter carried through the ceiling, a small empire being built on borrowed ground. Later, I sat on the edge of my bed, my soon-to-be former room, and looked at the framed photos on the dresser. David as a boy, gap-toothed and sunburned. Our lake house behind him, its porch wrapped in morning fog. He used to call it Grandma's Castle. Funny how quickly titles fade when convenience takes over. I began packing that night. Not angrily. Anger wastes energy. Just deliberately. One drawer at a time. Folded sweaters. Books with my notes in the margins. The framed picture of my wedding day. Each item felt like a small withdrawal from a joint account no one else remembered existed. The rain had started again. A thin Seattle drizzle tapping against the window. I've always loved that sound. It makes people stay indoors, quiet, reflective. It also hides tears if you happen to shed them. When I found my old phone in the nightstand, I scrolled past family group chats filled with birthday emojis and recipes no one cooked. Then I stopped on one name, Carla Monroe. Carla had been my friend since nursing school, the kind of woman who kept her pearls on during a crisis. She'd once told me, "Dignity isn't about how others treat you, Maggie. It's about how you respond when they forget who you are." I typed slowly. They've finally outgrown me. Let's open the file. The response came almost instantly. I was wondering when you'd say that. I slipped the phone back into my purse and zipped it shut. Then I took one last look around the room, at the indentation on the pillow, the pale rectangle on the wall where a picture had hung for years. Tomorrow they'd move my things into the den, the small windowless room off the hallway where we kept Christmas decorations and boxes labeled miscellaneous. But tonight, it was still mine. I lay down on the bed, the scent of lavender from my pillow rising faintly in the dark. Through the floorboards, I could hear Ethan pacing above me, already imagining the studio he'd fill with music or noise or both. I closed my eyes and let the rain take over the sound of everything else. They thought they were making room for the future. What they didn't realize was they'd just made space for my return. By morning, the house already sounded different. The kind of busy, careful noise people make when they're trying to avoid guilt. The shuffle of boxes, polite small talk, a little too much brightness in the voice. Lori had put on her project manager smile, organizing every detail as if I were another chore to be completed before lunch. David carried my things down the hall with that strained mix of duty and discomfort that passes for kindness in grown children. Ethan followed with headphones on, bobbing his head, oblivious. The den smelled faintly of dust and cedar polish. It was never meant to be lived in. Too narrow, too dim, too close to the laundry closet. A single lamp hummed in the corner, throwing a weak yellow light across the carpet. My old dresser barely fit along one wall. When David set down the last box, he hesitated. "You sure you're okay down here, Mom?" I met his eyes and gave him the softest smile I could find. "Of course. It's where you store things you don't use anymore." He blinked, not sure if I meant it as a joke, then nodded and left. Lori lingered in the doorway, her perfume wafting in with her. "Hope it's comfortable," she said, voice sugar-sweet. "Perfectly," I answered. "I've always liked quiet places." She gave a little shrug and closed the door behind her. For a moment, I just stood there, listening. Above me, Ethan's new studio came alive, speakers crackling, bass thumping through the ceiling like a heartbeat that didn't belong to the house. Somewhere upstairs, Lori laughed, probably already texting a friend about the new arrangement. I ran my hand along the small desk under the vent. A droplet of rain slipped through and landed on the wood, spreading slowly. Seattle rain, patient, persistent, and never in a hurry. From my suitcase, I pulled out the small metal box I'd hidden behind my clothes. Inside was the safety deposit key I hadn't touched in years. I held it up to the lamplight, its brass edges still clean, its number etched clearly. 117B. My real life, neatly compressed into a few ounces of metal. The phone buzzed. A text from Carla. "Cafe Renata, noon?" I typed back. "I'll be there." I changed clothes. Soft gray sweater, dark coat, pearls. Not armor, exactly. Just memory of who I used to be when I had authority over my own space. When I stepped out of the house, Lori's car keys jangled on the counter, her voice floating from the kitchen. "Don't forget your umbrella." I didn't answer. The rain would do me more good than cover. Cafe Renata was half empty, the kind of place that always smells faintly of cinnamon and wet wool. Carla was already there, 2 cappuccinos waiting, her reading glasses perched halfway down her nose. "You look calm," she said, studying me. "That worries me." I smiled. "Calm is cheaper than rage." She leaned forward. "So, how bad was it?" I stirred my coffee. "They gave me the den. Said Ethan needed more room for his art." Carla let out a soft whistle. Ah, the modern exile. Padded walls, polite smiles, and a candle in the corner. I laughed quietly. It felt good. The kind of laugh that doesn't fix anything but clears a small space to breathe. She reached into her purse and slid a slim envelope across the table. These are the updated account papers. Everything's still exactly where we left it. I touched the edge of the envelope, tracing the weight of the decision inside. Good. I'd hate to disturb anything before it's time. Carla tilted her head. Ready to make waves then? I looked out the rain-streaked window. A man across the street struggled to keep his umbrella from turning inside out. The sight made me smile. Such determination against something so inevitable. No, I said quietly. Ripples are enough. They grow on their own. Carla's eyes softened. You always were patient. I learned from the tide, I said. It goes out quietly before it comes roaring back. When I returned home, the house was dim, except for the rhythmic pulse of music from upstairs. The den door waited open, a faint draft drifting from the vent. I sat on the narrow bed, the envelope still in my hand. From somewhere above, Ethan's laughter bled through the floorboards, light and careless. I closed my eyes and let the sound roll over me, the way a nurse learns to listen past noise to hear what really matters. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady, unbothered. By the time it stopped, I'd already decided where to start. Banks have a particular smell, like paper that's never been touched and air that's never been shared. The marble floors glistened as I stepped inside, umbrella dripping faintly onto the mat. The receptionist smiled with professional brightness, the kind reserved for people who look like they're here to close an account rather than open a chapter. Good morning. Do you have an appointment? I do, I said. Margaret Lewis, safe deposit access. Her smile flickered with recognition, and she gestured toward a small seating area. The rain had followed me in, faint droplets clinging to my coat sleeves, glinting under the fluorescent light. Across the lobby, a man argued quietly with a teller about overdraft fees. I envied him for the simplicity of his outrage. After a few minutes, a younger banker appeared. Early 30s, pressed suit, pleasant but distant eyes. Mrs. Lewis, right this way. I followed him through a quiet corridor lined with closed doors until we reached a small metal room that smelled faintly of old polish. He handed me a clipboard, all formality and efficiency. Signature here, please? The vault door clicked open with the kind of authority only money and time can create. Inside, rows of numbered drawers stretched into the dimness. He stopped at 117B, my little square of autonomy, and slid it out onto the table. I'll give you a few minutes, he said, and stepped outside. For a moment, I just stared at the box. It was heavier than I remembered. When I opened it, the scent of old envelopes and pressed paper filled the air. Inside were neatly folded documents, my lake house deed, investment certificates, a letter from my late husband in his steady blue ink. If you ever doubt what's yours, check the numbers, not the faces. I smiled faintly. He always trusted math more than people. There it was. The life they thought I'd sold off after he died. The lake house, untouched. The investments, quietly compounding behind their indifference. Time had been kinder to my accounts than my family had been to me. I called the banker back in. I'll need to make some transfers. Of course, Mrs. Lewis. Everything here is still active. Active. The word felt right. Not just for the money, but for me. I sat across from him as he set up the terminal. I'd like to open a charitable trust, I said. Under my maiden name, Margaret Hawthorne. He nodded, typing swiftly. Purpose of the trust? I thought about Laurie's practiced smiles, David's distant sighs, Ethan's careless laughter. Then I thought about the nurses I used to train. Women who worked double shifts and still went home to take care of someone else. Educational grants, I said, for caregivers, the quiet kind. He smiled politely, unaware of the poetry tucked between the lines. Very admirable. When the paperwork was done, he handed me a folder, its weight satisfying in my hands. Everything's been transferred. Mrs. Lewis, the trust is officially established. Perfect, I said. Sometimes it's nice to see value in writing. As I left, I passed a reflection of myself in the glass doors. Older, yes, but not small. Just quieter. Like a lake that hides its depth until you step too close. Carla was waiting at a corner table in the same cafe, 2 empty mugs between us. She raised an eyebrow when she saw the folder. That was quick. So? Still intact? I slid it toward her. Every cent, every deed, every forgotten promise. She flipped through the papers, eyes scanning the headers. How poetic. They think you sold the house. I did, I said, smiling. To myself. Carla looked up at me, lips curving into approval. You always did prefer elegant revenge? It's not revenge, I said softly. It's reclamation. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city silvered and clean. A child splashed through a puddle, his laughter echoing against the storefront glass. I watched him for a long moment before speaking again. I'm calling it the Hawthorne Foundation. Retirement, reimagined. Carla chuckled. And the family? If family can't value you, I said, gathering the folder. The world might. She raised her coffee cup in a small toast. To the world, then. To ripples, I corrected. That evening, back in the den, I placed the folder inside the same metal box and slid it beneath my bed. Above me, the music from Ethan's room thumped faintly, the rhythm of someone who thought he owned silence. I turned off the lamp and listened instead to the faint echo of rain on the vent. The sound wasn't heavy tonight. It was deliberate, measured. Tomorrow, I would start writing the first grant proposal. Not for them, for me. And for anyone who'd ever been moved out of their own room. The next morning, the house woke before I did. Or maybe it never slept. The scent of coffee drifted down the hall, mingling with burnt toast and the faint hum of Ethan's new speakers. I sat up slowly, the chill from the vent brushing against my ankles. The den had its own kind of quiet now. Not peace exactly, but insulation. When I walked into the kitchen, the family was already halfway through breakfast. Lori moved briskly between the stove and the table, performing domesticity like it was a stage role. David scrolled through his phone, eyes half-focused on a spreadsheet. Ethan sat at the counter, earbuds out for once, a cereal bowl clutched in his hand. He glanced up when he saw me. Grandma, could you, maybe, I don't know, knock before you come through my space next time? I paused by the sink. Your space? Yeah, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the hallway. It's just like the sound carries. I was recording late last night, and when you got up to use the bathroom, it messed with my mic levels. I turned on the tap, the sound of running water filling the silence. I'll try to be more considerate, I said. Lori swooped in, smiling too brightly. Ethan's just trying to stay focused. He's so dedicated to his music. You understand how important creative space is? David didn't look up. Let's not make a thing out of it, okay? I dried my hands on a towel, then took a seat at the edge of the table. I'll make arrangements soon, I said evenly. Don't worry. Ethan leaned back in his chair, spoon tapping the bowl. Good. We can rent that den to someone who can actually pay. The spoon clinked. David's hand froze mid-scroll. Lori's smile faltered. No one said anything. Not right away. The rain outside whispered against the windows. That soft, almost tender sound Seattle makes when it's pretending to be calm. I met Ethan's eyes. Not angry, not hurt, just present. That's a clever idea, I said finally. Let me know what you find on the market. Experience is valuable at your age. He blinked, unsure whether he was being praised or corrected. Lori forced a laugh that sounded brittle. Oh, he's just teasing, Maggie. I'm sure, I said, rising from the chair. Teasing is a form of honesty for people who don't like consequences. I rinsed my empty coffee cup, placed it neatly in the rack, and walked back down the hall. Behind me, I could feel the discomfort hang like fog. In the den, I opened the small notebook I kept tucked under my pillow. The pages were filled with slanted handwriting, fragments of thoughts, reminders, pieces of the woman I'd been before this house learned to shrink me. Today's line came easy. Entitlement is inheritance without gratitude. I underlined it twice. The rain tapped the vent again, steady and familiar. I imagined the lake house in that weather, its wide porch, the scent of cedar rising from the wet wood. The thought didn't ache anymore. It steadied me. My phone buzzed. Carla. Phase 2? I stared at the message, my reflection faint in the screen. Lined face, clear eyes, pearls still fastened from the day before. I typed back, "Yes, let's start the sale." A pause, then her reply. Quietly, I assume. Always. That afternoon, I stepped outside for the first time in hours. The air was damp, the kind of gray that feels like it has weight. Across the street, the neighbor's maple tree had started to turn, a slow bleed of red through green. Change is always quiet before it's visible. When I came back inside, Ethan's music thundered from above, some rhythm that pretended to be rebellion, but was really just noise. I smiled faintly. He thought he was building something new. He didn't realize he was rehearsing for history. In the den, I pulled out the folder from beneath my bed. The embossed letters on the cover caught the lamplight. The Hawthorne Foundation. I traced them with my thumb. I wasn't angry anymore, just certain. That night, I wrote one more line in my journal before turning out the lamp. They measure success in square footage. I measure it in silence earned. The vent rattled softly as the wind picked up. Somewhere upstairs, laughter spilled through the floorboards again. Bright, fleeting, careless. I smiled into the dark. Let them rent my space, I thought. I'm already buying the ground beneath their feet. It happened on a Sunday. The kind of gray Seattle morning where the sky can't decide whether to rain or just linger. Lori had set the table for brunch, a half-hearted attempt at family tradition. Quiche, store-bought croissants, orange juice in crystal glasses, effort wrapped in presentation. Ethan was still upstairs, his studio pulsing faintly through the ceiling like a heartbeat the house had learned to tolerate. David scrolled his phone, and Lori rearranged the silverware for the third time. I waited until she sat down. "I've been thinking," I said, buttering my toast. "It might be time to sell the lake house." The words landed like a dropped fork. A sharp pause, followed by stillness. David looked up immediately. "Really? That's great, Mom. That money could help everyone." Finally. Finally, Lori echoed, already calculating. "If we're smart, we can invest half and save the rest. Maybe start a college fund for Ethan." I sipped my tea, letting their enthusiasm roll through the room like a tide I'd predicted. "Of course," I said softly. "It should benefit the family." David leaned back, visibly relieved. You'll want me to help with the paperwork, I assume. We can talk to a realtor I know in Bellevue. That won't be necessary, I said. Carla's already handling it. Lori's smile faltered, though she tried to hide it. Oh, Carla's still advising you? On occasion, I said. She's reliable. Reliable, Lori repeated, as if the word tasted foreign. David nodded slowly, more cautious now. You're sure this is what you want? That house meant a lot to Dad. I placed my cup down gently. It still does. They didn't understand the double meaning, or maybe they chose not to. Lori reached across the table, the picture of polite concern. It's brave of you, Maggie. Letting go of the past like that. Letting go, I murmured. Yes, something like that. 2 days later, Carla and I sat in her office, papers spread across the desk like cards in a long game we both already knew the outcome of. The Hawthorne Foundation will purchase the property directly, she said, adjusting her glasses. Technically, it's a transfer of ownership. Clean, legal, invisible. I nodded. They'll see the listing, the sale record, and nothing more. Carla smiled. They'll think it's gone. In truth, I said, signing the first page. It's protected. The pen moved easily, years of signatures teaching my hand not to shake when the moment mattered. Carla studied me over the frames of her glasses. You're remarkably calm for someone selling her sanctuary. I'm not selling memories, I said. I'm securing boundaries. She let out a quiet laugh, then turned the document toward me. This clause ensures full control remains with you. The trust owns the house. You own the trust. Poetic, really. Poetry's just truth that doesn't apologize, I said. Carla grinned. Then you've written quite a verse. That evening, I made dinner. Not out of obligation, but out of habit. Old habits are hard to evict. David came home late, tie loosened, the stress of his workday creasing his face. He smiled faintly when he saw the casserole. Smells good. How'd the paperwork go? Smoothly, I said. It's in motion. He nodded. You'll feel lighter once it's done, Mom. You've been carrying that place for too long. I watched him sit, exhaustion softening his edges. Maybe, I said. But some things carry you back. Lori joined us halfway through dinner, tapping on her phone between bites. I checked the market, she said brightly. Lake properties are going fast. You'll get an amazing return. I already did, I said. She didn't catch it. When the dishes were cleared, I walked out onto the porch. The rain had started again, thin and persistent. In the window's reflection, the house glowed behind me, warm and false. My phone buzzed. Carla. All finalized. The deed's been recorded. Congratulations, Mrs. Hawthorne. Mrs. Hawthorne. It had been decades since anyone called me that. The name felt like steel, polished, intact, and finally mine again. I typed back, "Thank you. Quietly done. Just as planned." Her reply came a moment later. "Enjoy the peace while it lasts. Ripples are starting." I slipped the phone into my coat pocket and looked up at the night sky, the rain softening the edges of everything. Inside, I could hear Ethan laughing. The careless kind that only comes from assuming the ground will never shift beneath you. I smiled to myself. It always does. The invitation arrived folded in cream cardstock, the kind of heavy paper that pretends to mean something. Lori left it on my nightstand, resting neatly on top of a stack of folded towels. "Thought you might want to join," she'd said that morning. Tone light, but expectant. "It's for families in need. The neighborhood association is hosting it. All the right people will be there." All the right people. I repeated, testing the words like an unfamiliar spice. Now, standing before the mirror that evening, I pinned my brooch just below the collar. Small pearl, understated. A whisperer of who I used to be. The den behind me looked the same. Dim, quiet, barely mine. But the reflection staring back carried something new. Not bitterness, exactly. Something colder, sharper. Downstairs, Lori waited in a fitted navy dress, all gloss and confidence. "You look lovely, Maggie," she said. "I think it's good for you to get out. You've been keeping to yourself lately?" I smiled faintly. Yes, reflection takes space. She didn't know what I meant, and I didn't help her understand. The venue was the Lakeside Community Hall, all chandeliers, linen-covered tables, and the faint scent of catered ambition. A jazz trio played near the stage, soft enough to allow networking over melody. I'd been to 1,000 such events during my nursing years. Fundraisers for hospitals, research, children's wards. But those had been honest. This was performance. Lori swept through the room like she owned it, her hand grazing shoulders, laughter bright but hollow. "We've been so lucky," she told a woman in sequins. "That's why we always try to give back." I stood by the punch table, the irony blooming slow and sweet. The banner above the stage read, "Families First Benefit Gala." Underneath, the sponsor's name printed neatly, the Hawthorne Foundation. No one here knew that was me. Carla appeared beside me, effortlessly composed in black silk and pearls. She handed me a glass of champagne. "You do realize," she murmured, "you're funding the very people pretending to fund others." "Poetic symmetry," I said. "It's the only language some understand." Her eyes twinkled. "You could tell them?" "Why?" I asked. "They'd only find a way to make it about themselves." Across the room, Lori had gathered a small circle of admirers. She spoke with practiced ease, each sentence polished to sound generous. "We're just doing what we can," she said, her hand resting lightly on David's arm. "Families today need support. I've always believed giving starts at home." The laughter that followed was soft, approving. I took a sip of champagne, the bubbles sharp against my tongue. Then I walked toward them. Lori's smile stretched wider as I approached. "Oh, Maggie, everyone was just talking about how lovely this event is. You remember the Porters, their daughter's applying to UW." "I do," I said, shaking hands politely. "Good to see familiar faces supporting good causes." "Exactly," Lori said, pleased. "It's important to help the less fortunate." I studied her for a long moment, her perfect hair, her curated sincerity. "Do you ever feel guilty?" I asked, softly enough that only she could hear. Her brow arched. "For what?" "For confusing kindness with control." The smile faltered, just for a heartbeat. I, I'm not sure what you mean." "I think you do," I said gently. "But it's fine. Some lessons come late." Carla appeared behind me then, raising her glass. "Maggie," she said with deliberate cheer. "To generosity, in all its forms." Our glasses clinked softly, the sound sharper than it should have been. Later, as speeches began, I stood at the edge of the crowd. The host thanked donors, applauding their compassion. When they reached the Hawthorne Foundation, polite applause rippled through the room. Lori clapping, unaware. David leaned toward her, whispering something I couldn't hear. She smiled again, relieved to be seen, to be relevant. Beside me, Carla whispered, "They're applauding you." "I know," I said. "Let them. Gratitude doesn't always need explanation." When the lights dimmed for the closing toast, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. Calm, unreadable, untouched. Lori's laughter floated through the noise, rehearsed and radiant. Carla leaned close, her voice low. "You're enjoying this." I kept my eyes on the stage. "I'm remembering who I am." The applause swelled again. I smiled, faintly. It was almost time for the next ripple. The morning after the gala, the house felt heavier, as if the applause had followed us home and settled somewhere between the walls. Lori hummed in the kitchen, still glowing from borrowed praise. David sat at the table, nursing coffee, his tie already loosened though it wasn't yet 9. When I entered, he looked up with that practiced blend of concern and determination that usually preceded a conversation he didn't want to have. "Morning, Mom," he began, clearing his throat. "Can we talk for a minute?" "Of course," I said, pouring tea. "That usually means you've already rehearsed your half." He smiled faintly. "You know me too well." Then, after a breath, "I've been thinking. It might be good for you to find your own place soon." The cup paused midair. "My own place?" "Yeah," he said quickly, as if speeding past discomfort. "You've done so much for us, but I think you'd be happier with more independence. Somewhere that's really yours." The word independence landed like a polite insult. I set the cup down gently. "You mean somewhere that isn't yours?" He hesitated, glancing toward the hallway where Lori pretended not to listen. "It's not that," he said. "It's just space. You deserve that." I smiled thinly. "I seem to inspire people to make room lately." "Maggie," he said softly, switching to the tone he used when breaking bad news to patience. Soothing, practiced. "You've been through a lot. Maybe a smaller apartment. Something easier to manage. I can help with the deposit." "Generous of you," I said. "Though I think I can handle a deposit." He looked relieved at my calmness, mistaking composure for agreement. "Great. Maybe we can start looking this weekend?" "Of course," I said. "I'll start today." Upstairs, I could hear Lori on a call, laughing the brittle kind of laugh that sounds like networking. Ethan's music bled faintly from his room, thumping confidence built on zero consequence. I took my time finishing breakfast, reading the real estate section of the paper more for theater than information. When Ethan finally wandered in, barefoot, hair tousled, he grinned. "Grandma, Dad says you're apartment hunting?" "So it seems," I said. He dropped onto a stool. "Cool. I can help you post your room listing. There's this site I use when my friends need tenants. We'll get your den rented in no time." I folded the paper. "No need," I said. "Someone already rented mine." He frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" I smiled, standing. "Just that I'm taken care of." Lori appeared then, perfectly timed, clutching her phone like a trophy. "Ethan, don't bother your grandmother. She's got a lot to figure out." Then to me, "Let me know if you need help sorting through listings. I know the best areas for seniors." "Seniors," I repeated as if tasting it. "Yes, I imagine you do." She caught the edge in my tone but dismissed it, mistaking it for fatigue. "We'll make sure you're somewhere nice," she said, patting my shoulder. "You deserve comfort." "I already have it," I said. Their confusion hung in the air, a silence so thick it could bruise. I didn't give it time to breathe. I went back to the den, closing the door behind me. The lamp's yellow light fell across my small desk, the folder from Carla still waiting there like a co-conspirator. I slipped it into my purse, checking the time. My appointment at the attorney's office was in 30 minutes. Outside, the rain had started again. Steady, purposeful. Seattle's most consistent mood. I caught my reflection in the dark window as I tied my scarf. The woman staring back didn't look like someone being pushed out. She looked like someone quietly walking towards something that already belonged to her. When I stepped into the hallway, David called after me. Going somewhere? Yes, I said without turning. To make arrangements. He frowned. For the apartment? Something like that. The air outside was sharp and wet, the kind of chill that wakes the body before the mind catches up. As I walked toward my car, I passed the for sale signs dotting the street. Smaller homes, painted optimism. Mine wasn't listed anymore. I smiled to myself as I started the engine. Independence, after all, is just a matter of paperwork. The attorney's office sat on the 10th floor of a building that looked like it had been built to outlast weather and guilt alike. The elevator hummed its way up, each floor blinking past like a slow confession. When the doors opened, Carla was already there, perched on the edge of a sleek leather chair in the reception area, reading through a folder. She didn't look up right away. She never did when she wanted to make a point about patience. "Morning," I said, slipping off my gloves. "Morning," she replied, still scanning a document. "You're right on time." They called ahead. "The title transfer's ready." The receptionist, a young man with two perfect hair, ushered us toward a conference room lined with glass. Seattle stretched beyond it, a watercolor of steel and rain. The table gleamed under soft light, polished and waiting. Carla nodded toward the seat at the head. "You should sit there." I did. It felt strangely natural. Across the table, the lawyer, a measured man with a calm accountant's voice, began to explain. "Mrs. Lewis, as discussed, the Lewis family property will be transferred due to a refinancing default." "Default?" I asked, though I already knew. "Yes," he said, flipping through papers. "It seems the mortgage was refinanced 2 years ago under your son's name, but payments lapsed. Nothing serious yet, but enough to trigger repossession eligibility. The bank has agreed to a private settlement with an approved buyer." I glanced at Carla. "And that buyer?" "The Hawthorne Foundation," she said simply, signing her name in deliberate strokes. He pushed the document toward me. "This will finalize the transfer. Once filed, the property is no longer in your son's name. However," he adjusted his glasses, "the family may remain as tenants if they meet the rental terms set by the new owner." Carla smiled without warmth. "We'll make sure the terms are fair." I took the pen from the table. Fairness is a matter of perspective. The pen tip hovered for a moment before meeting the line. The signature came easily, steady, unshaken. The lawyer gathered the pages, sliding them into a crisp envelope. "Congratulations, Mrs. Lewis. The property now belongs to the Hawthorne Foundation." Mrs. Hawthorne again. The name felt like a key slipping into a long-locked door. When he left the room, Carla poured us both coffee from a silver carafe. "They'll still live there," she said, handing me a cup. "Just under new management." I smiled. "Poetic justice often comes with a lease." She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "You're enjoying this?" I looked out at the skyline, gray clouds pressing low over the sound, the city humming beneath them. "I'm remembering my worth," I said quietly. "There's a difference." Carla studied me for a long moment. "Do you ever worry this crosses a line?" "There are no lines," I said. "Only boundaries. And mine were erased long ago." She nodded slowly. "Then it's about time you drew them back." On the drive home, rain traced slow paths down the windshield. The wipers beat in steady rhythm, like a metronome marking patience. Through the blur of traffic lights, I thought about the house. The laughter, the slammed doors, The quiet sacrifices made invisible over time. They had treated it like inheritance waiting to be claimed. They never realized it was still mine to give, or to take back. At a red light, my phone buzzed. A message from Carla. Filed and confirmed. The deed is active under the foundation, effective immediately. I read it twice, then set the phone face down on the seat beside me. The light turned green. When I arrived home, the driveway looked the same. David's car, Lori's SUV, Ethan's bike leaning carelessly against the porch rail. But something in the air had shifted, like the stillness before thunder. Inside, voices carried faintly from upstairs. I walked past the photos on the hallway wall, smiling faces in chronological order, moments that looked permanent but weren't. In the den, I hung up my coat and took out my journal. The ink glided easily as I wrote, "Justice doesn't need to shout, it just needs a signature." I closed the book and listened. Somewhere above, the house creaked, as if it already knew it belonged to someone else. I smiled to myself. They'd find out soon enough. A month later, spring tried to make itself known. Thin sunlight through gray clouds, the kind of hesitant warmth that doesn't quite commit. The house smelled faintly of detergent and discontent. I was folding laundry in the den, towels mostly, their edges still warm, when I heard the mailbox clatter. Lori's voice followed, sharp and immediate. "David!" she called from the entryway. "You need to see this." There was a rhythm to panic, quick, clipped, almost rehearsed. I listened from my chair, matching corners of fabric while footsteps collided down the hallway. David appeared in the doorway, envelope in hand, brow furrowed. "What now?" Lori thrust the letter at him, her manicured finger jabbing at the seal. "This. It's addressed to us. But look at the return label." He squinted. "Hawthorne Lakes Trust." "That's not our mortgage company," she said. "It says new ownership terms. What does that even mean?" He tore the envelope open, lips moving as he read. I watched the color drain from his face like ink dissolving in water. "It's a lease notice," he said finally. "Effective immediately. Property ownership has transferred. New management requests confirmation of tenancy, with monthly rent." "Rent?" Lori echoed, her voice pitching high. "We own this house." David sank onto the nearest chair, still reading. "Apparently not. There's a contact number for questions. Something about missed payments and settlement transfer." I stacked another towel, smoothing its surface carefully before folding it again. "Who bought it?" Lori asked, pacing. "It has to be a mistake. Maybe the bank? Or a development company? We can fight this, right?" David rubbed his temples. "Calm down. I'll call the county clerk first. If there's been a transfer, it has to be on record." She crossed her arms, furious and frightened in equal measure. "Call now." He did. I heard the muffled ring, the polite efficiency of someone on the other end confirming details that could undo a life. "Yes," David said into the phone. "Lewis Residence, Pinewood Lane. I just received— Yes, Hawthorne Lakes Trust. I need to know who—" A pause. Then his tone flattened. "What?" Another pause. "Can you repeat that?" The silence stretched. "Finally," he whispered. "Thank you." He hung up, staring at the letter as if it had grown teeth. "Well?" Lori demanded. He swallowed. "The clerk says it's legitimate. Ownership's under a private charitable foundation." "Which one?" He looked at her, eyes unfocused. "The Hawthorne Foundation." She blinked. "Who the hell is Hawthorne?" I folded another towel. "It's a family name," I said softly. They turned toward me. I didn't look up. Lori's mouth opened, closed, opened again. You, you knew about this? I know a great many things, I said, aligning the folded towels in a neat stack. But perhaps you should finish reading your mail before making assumptions. David stood, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. Mom, what's going on? I smiled faintly. Just paperwork, dear, the sort that corrects oversight. Are you saying? He stopped, shaking his head. That can't be. Lori grabbed the letter, scanning it herself. You didn't? Maggie, please tell me you didn't buy our house. Our? I repeated, tasting the word like something long overdue. Ownership is relative, darling. You taught me that. For a moment, no one spoke. The rain began again outside, soft and steady. Ethan's footsteps thudded on the stairs. What's happening? Nothing, Lori snapped. Go upstairs. He didn't move, eyes darting between us. Mom? Go, she shouted. He went, slowly. David pressed the letter flat on the table, his voice quiet but strained. We can fix this, right? Reverse it somehow? I imagine the new owners would be open to discussion, I said, though I hear they have strict terms about respect and timeliness. Lori's voice cracked. This isn't fair. I lifted the last towel and set it gently atop the pile. Fairness, I said, is a matter of perspective. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Carla. Checkmate. I looked toward the window. The rain was lighter now, the kind that softens everything it touches but leaves no room for forgetting. When I turned back, David was still staring at the letter, his thumb rubbing over the embossed logo, Hawthorne Lakes Trust. Anything interesting in the mail? I asked. No one answered. I gathered the towels and walked down the hall, their quiet weight warm in my arms. Behind me, I could hear the first sound of something breaking. Not glass, not wood, just certainty. They waited until morning to come for me. I heard them before I saw them. Footsteps pacing above the den, the heavy scrape of a chair pulled too far back. Even the rain outside seemed to hesitate, listening. When I opened the door, David stood in the hallway, eyes hollow from a sleepless night. Lori hovered behind him, arms crossed, face a careful mask stretched over fury. He held the letter in one hand, crumpled from being read too many times. You knew, he said, voice tight. You knew this would happen. I adjusted the belt on my robe, calm as breath. I know a lot of things. He stepped closer. Don't do that. Don't pretend you didn't plan this. The house, our house. How could you? Our house? I asked. You mean the one I bought, maintained, paid taxes on, and graciously shared? Lori pushed forward, voice trembling with anger. You humiliated us. Do you have any idea what people will say? When the bank calls? When the neighbors find out? Humiliation, I said softly, is a strange word to use when you're still living rent-free. That's not the point, she shouted. You've made us look like fools. Perhaps, I said, but only because you insisted on playing roles you didn't understand. David's hand ran through his hair, his voice cracking somewhere between disbelief and grief. You could have told me, we could have fixed this together. I tilted my head. You didn't want me as part of together, remember? You made that clear when you suggested I find my own place. That was different. Only in tone, I said. Lori slammed her palm against the wall. You've crossed a line, Maggie. There are no lines, I replied. Just boundaries. You erased mine. I redrew them. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that makes sound itself retreat. From the stairs, Ethan's voice broke the tension. What's going on? Lori turned, snapping. Not now. But he came down anyway, barefoot, hair mussed, confusion in every step. He looked between us, his father pale, his mother shaking, me perfectly still. "Grandma?" he said quietly. "Are we in trouble?" I met his eyes, the only pair in the house still capable of innocence. "No, sweetheart," I said. "Not yet." He frowned. "Dad said someone else owns the house now." "That's right." "Then where are we supposed to go?" I folded my arms. "That depends on how well your parents read the lease." Lori's voice wavered between panic and rage. "You can't do this to us." I turned to her. "You rented out my room," I said evenly. "I rented out your pride." The sentence hung in the air like smoke, slow, curling, inescapable. David looked away, his throat working as if the words themselves had weight. "Why?" he whispered. "You're my mother." "And I was your safety net," I said. "But even nets have limits before they tear." Lori's eyes glistened, though the tears refused to fall. "We were just trying to help you move on." "I did," I said. "You just didn't notice which direction." For a long moment, no one spoke. The rain tapped faintly on the windows, soft and relentless. Ethan shifted awkwardly at the bottom of the stairs, his voice barely audible. "Grandma," he said, "do you hate us?" I turned toward him fully, my tone softer now. "No, I'm teaching you." "Teaching us what?" "That even love," I said, "needs consequences." I gathered the folded laundry from the chair and carried it toward the den. Behind me, I could hear the low murmur of their voices, disbelief reshaping into something else. Control, I thought. They were trying to find a new balance in a world that had quietly changed hands. In my room, I set the towels aside and opened my journal. "Justice doesn't stay quiet forever," I wrote. "Eventually, even silence echoes." My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Carla. "Stage 3? Ready when you are." I typed back, "Soon." Then I looked toward the ceiling, to the laughter and music that once filled the space above me, and smiled. They hadn't lost their home. They'd simply started paying rent on their lessons. The house went quiet after that morning. Not peaceful quiet, but the heavy kind that smells like regret and burned coffee. Doors closed softer. Voices stayed low. Even Ethan's music disappeared, replaced by silence that felt almost obedient. By evening, the rain had stopped, leaving the windows streaked and the air thick with that post-storm stillness that makes you listen harder than you mean to. I sat on the edge of the bed, the lamp's dim glow reaching only half the room. My journal lay open but blank. For once, there was nothing left to write that the walls didn't already know. A soft knock came at the door. Once, then again. Hesitant. "Come in," I said. The door opened just enough for Ethan to peek through. His hair was damp, his eyes uncertain. He stepped inside like someone entering a church. "Hey," he said quietly. I nodded toward the chair. "Hey." He sat, fidgeting with the cuff of his sweatshirt, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry." I looked at him for a long moment. "For what, sweetheart?" He swallowed. "For the way I talked to you. That day. About the room. About rent. I didn't mean it like that." I smiled faintly. "You meant exactly what you were taught." His brow furrowed, shame flashing across his face. "That's not fair." "No," I said softly. "But it's true." He looked down at his hands, the sleeves of his sweatshirt pulled over his knuckles like armor. "I didn't know you still owned everything. Dad said you sold it after Grandpa died." I let him believe that, I said. "Sometimes it's easier to let people feel powerful than to argue about where the ground really is." He nodded slowly, thinking it through. "So, you bought the house back?" "Not back," I said. I just stopped giving it away. He blinked. I don't understand. You will, I said. Someday. The lamp flickered once, briefly. He looked around, uneasy, like the air itself was different down here. I could see his mind turning. The first cracks in the comfortable ignorance he'd inherited. You know, I said after a moment, when I was your age, my mother made me work summers in a nursing home. She said caring for people teaches you how fragile pride really is. He half smiled. Dad said you were the best nurse they had. I shrugged. I was good at listening. He looked at me then, really looked, like he was seeing something new instead of someone old. I want to understand you better, he said. I mean, I should have tried before. It's never too late, I said, though part of me knew it sometimes was. I reached into the drawer beside the bed and pulled out a small envelope, the paper thick and cream-colored like old stationery. I handed it to him. What's this? He asked. Open it. He did. Inside was a single sheet of paper with neat black print and an embossed seal at the bottom. The Hawthorne Foundation, Youth Scholarship Initiative. His name was already typed in. His eyes widened. You. This is for me? I nodded. A fund for your first year of college. Not a gift. An investment. Education teaches what family forgot. He stared at it, then at me. You didn't have to. I know, I interrupted gently. That's why it matters. For a while, neither of us spoke. The house above us murmured faintly, the sound of water running, a door closing, the distant echo of two adults trying to make sense of the power they'd lost. Ethan finally stood, slipping the envelope into his jacket pocket like something fragile. Thank you, Grandma. I smiled. Do something with it. Something that makes you useful? He hesitated at the door, then turned back. You're not mad at me? Mad? I shook my head. No. Disappointed would mean I expected more. I softened the words with a small smile. But hopeful? That's different. He nodded, eyes shining in a way that didn't belong to guilt anymore. Good night. Good night, Ethan. When he left, I leaned back against the pillow, the rain starting again, gentle this time, forgiving. I looked at the empty chair where he'd sat and thought, maybe redemption skips a generation. Then I closed my eyes, the faint rhythm of drops against the vent marking time until morning. Tomorrow, the real reckoning would begin. By the time dawn slipped through the blinds, the house had lost whatever balance it once pretended to have. Laurie's voice was already climbing the walls, sharp enough to cut the quiet. We can't just sit here, David, she shouted from the kitchen. She manipulated you, us, everything. We should sue her. David didn't answer right away. He sat at the table in his rumpled shirt, hands around a mug gone cold, eyes fixed on the condensation pooling beneath it. The fatigue clung to him like a second skin. Sue her for what? He asked finally. For signing her own name on her own property? She tricked you. Laurie's heels clicked against the tile like punctuation marks. There has to be something illegal about it. Undue influence, elder abuse, something? He looked up at her, expression flat. Elder abuse? Laurie. She is the elder. That's not the point, she snapped. She destroyed us. He shook his head slowly, rubbing his forehead. No, he said. We did that ourselves. The sentence hung between them, heavy as thunder. Laurie stared at him, the certainty draining from her face. You're taking her side? I'm just tired of sides, he said. Tired of pretending I didn't let this happen. She laughed, brittle and panicked. You think this is your fault? I refinanced the house without checking the fine print. You spent the savings on image and renovations we couldn't afford, and we treated her like an obligation instead of a person. He exhaled. Yeah, I think it's our fault. Her voice softened, trembling now. David, please. You're not thinking straight. She humiliated us in front of everyone. She warned us in quieter ways, he said. We just didn't listen. Lori pressed her palms against the counter, her shoulders shaking. What are we supposed to do now? Just live here like tenants? He looked around the kitchen, the perfect countertops, the spotless appliances, the curated life that no longer belonged to them. Maybe that's what we were all along, he murmured. She turned away, gripping the edge of the sink. You can't honestly forgive her. He didn't answer. He stood, pushing the chair back gently, and walked toward the hallway. Where are you going? To talk to my mother. David! She called after him, but he didn't turn. Her voice followed him down the hall, splintering against the walls until it became nothing more than another noise the house learned to swallow. I heard his footsteps before the knock, measured, deliberate. I didn't look up right away. The teapot on the desk had just begun to whistle. Come in, I said. He opened the door slowly like a man stepping into confession. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face drawn but clear in a way I hadn't seen for years. Mom, he said quietly. I poured 2 cups of tea, gesturing toward the chair across from me. You look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have. He managed a small, broken smile before sitting. For a while, we said nothing. The rain had started again. Not harsh this time, just steady. Familiar. Finally, he spoke. I wanted to hate you. God, I tried. But the truth is, I think you did what I should have done a long time ago. I studied his hands. Protect what matters. Remember who you are, he said. You didn't destroy us, Mom. You just stopped letting us destroy you. I felt something catch in my throat. Pride, sorrow, maybe both. That's progress, David. Realizing the difference. He reached across the table then, his hand tentative at first, then firm. I'm sorry, he whispered. The apology settled in the air between us, warm and unexpected. I took his hand. The skin was rougher than I remembered, the grip uncertain. A man's, not a boy's. Forgiveness came slowly like light after a storm, but it came. Let's just start from here, I said. He nodded, tears threatening. She's furious, he admitted. Lori, I don't know what's going to happen. She'll survive, I said. Pride always does. It just changes its name. He let out a shaky laugh, standing to leave. You're something else, Mom. I smiled. So they keep telling me. When the door closed behind him, I sat back and listened to the rain, a faint smile playing on my lips. For the first time in months, the house sounded different, lighter, emptied of its storm. Forgiveness doesn't erase debt, I thought. It simply stops charging interest. And somewhere upstairs, a door opened instead of closing. It started with the smell of paint, soft, clean, deliberate. The basement had spent years forgotten, a cluttered tomb of broken furniture and holiday boxes labeled in Lori's handwriting. Now, sunlight slipped through the high windows for the first time in decades, cutting narrow stripes across the concrete floor. Carla stood beside me, clipboard in hand, watching the contractor patch the final corner of the drywall. I can't decide if this feels like a renovation or a resurrection, she said. Maybe both, I replied. The space was small but open, just enough for 2 desks, a filing cabinet, and a modest meeting table. The sign on the new door would read, The Hawthorne Foundation, Community Outreach Office. It wasn't the lake house, but it was mine. Carla smirked. You realize the poetic symmetry of putting your foundation under their feet? I do, I said. Poetry's always been about placement. She checked her notes. Ava Torres arrives this afternoon. Smart girl, scholarship student from the nursing program, first-generation college kid. She reminds me of you at 20. Let's hope she has a better temper, I said. Carla laughed, squeezing my shoulder. You've turned the place into something alive again. That's what counts. By the time Ava arrived, the rain had returned, a light drizzle that softened the world without dulling it. She was smaller than I expected, wearing an oversized sweater and carrying a backpack that looked heavier than she was. Mrs. Lewis, she asked, offering a tentative smile. Call me Maggie, I said, shaking her hand. Welcome to the most unorthodox office in Seattle. Her eyes widened as she looked around. It's beautiful. You'd never guess this was a basement. That's the point, I said. People do better work when they forget where they've been put. She laughed. A real laugh, bright and clean. I liked her instantly. We went over paperwork at the new table, the hum of the radiator keeping time between sentences. You'll handle correspondence, donations, volunteer scheduling, I explained. The rent agreement is mostly symbolic. The foundation pays it directly, one account to another. She frowned slightly. So the money stays here? Exactly, I said. Every dollar returns to the community, to people who remember what help is supposed to feel like. Her smile turned soft. That's rare. So is gratitude, I said. Upstairs, the sound of footsteps echoed faintly, Laurie's, clipped and restless. By late afternoon, she found her way down. What on earth? She began, her voice sharp as glass. What is all this? I didn't turn immediately. Office space, I said. The foundation needed a local branch. Her eyes darted from the painted walls to Ava, who stood by the desk, suddenly nervous. You turned our basement into a charity office? Laurie demanded. Our? I asked gently, facing her now. I didn't see your name on the deed. The silence after that was exquisite, thin as porcelain, seconds from cracking. Laurie's hands curled into fists. You've lost your mind. Renting to strangers. Running your little crusade out of our home? Ava tried to speak, but I lifted a hand. Ava's not a stranger. She's an employee, and technically, a tenant. Her rent supports the outreach program you were so proud to toast at the gala. Laurie blinked. What? Every payment cycles back into scholarships and caregiver stipends, I said. Poetic, really? Charity from the ground up. Her breath hitched, humiliation turning her pale. You're unbelievable. I've been called worse, I said. She looked around as if the walls might agree with her, then turned on her heel and stormed up the stairs. The door slammed, the sound reverberating through the pipes. Ava shifted uneasily. Did I cause trouble? Not at all, I said, smiling. You just revealed what was already broken. A moment later, Ethan appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked uncertain, older somehow. Grandma. Yes, dear? He hesitated, eyes flicking toward Ava. Is she the new tenant? She's the new tenant and the new beginning, I said. He came down a few steps, hands in his pockets. Can I volunteer too? Ava smiled at him, and I felt something loosen in the air. Possibility, maybe. I'd like that, I said. We could use another pair of hands. He grinned, the first real one I'd seen from him in months. Carla's text buzzed on my phone. Stage 3 complete. They're still living there, but under new management. I looked up toward the ceiling, where Laurie's footsteps paced above, hollow and directionless. Some people never notice the foundation, I murmured, until it's the only thing holding them up. The rain picked up again, steady and silver. In the basement, surrounded by purpose and quiet, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Home. The seasons turned without asking permission. Seattle's rain grew softer, the kind that came and went like passing thoughts. By late spring, the house finally learned to breathe again. Ava's laughter now drifted up through the floorboards. Warm, steady, alive. It mixed with the low murmur of Ethan's voice as he read grant applications aloud, mispronouncing the occasional word and pretending not to blush when Ava corrected him. Every Saturday morning, the two of them met in the basement office, organizing donations, writing emails, labeling boxes for caregivers who'd been forgotten by their own families. Sometimes I watched from the stairs, coffee in hand, letting the sound of their work fill the spaces where resentment used to live. Ethan had grown quieter these days, not shy, but deliberate. He held doors open. He said thank you without irony. Once, I overheard him tell Ava, "My grandma built all this while we were too busy trying to manage her." Ava smiled when she told me later, "You've raised a good one, Maggie." "I just stopped lowering the bar," I said. David started visiting more often, too. Not out of guilt, but habit. The first few times he arrived with his sleeves rolled and his eyes searching for words he hadn't yet earned. Eventually, he stopped trying to fill the silences. We'd sit on the porch some evenings, 2 cups of tea cooling between us as the sun dissolved into the sound. He'd talk about work, or how Ethan was doing better in school, or how Lori had started therapy. A sentence that came out fragile, as though saying it aloud might break it. "She'll come around," I said once. He nodded. "She's trying." That was enough. He never mentioned the foundation directly, though sometimes his eyes flickered toward the house when Ava and Ethan carried boxes out to the car. There was something like pride there, quiet, unclaimed. The kind men feel when they recognize strength but don't know how to name it. When the last of the paperwork cleared and the renovations at the lake house were finished, I packed my things. Not much. A few books, my journals, the photo of my husband that had outlived every argument. Ava and Ethan helped load the boxes. Carla supervised, naturally, with her sunglasses perched in her hair and a clipboard she didn't really need. "You realize," she said, "most people retire by selling their assets. You, meanwhile, turned yours into a community enterprise." I smiled. "Mathematically, it evens out." "Mathematically," she said, "you terrify me." We drove to the lake house that afternoon, the 3 of them in one car, me following behind. The closer we got, the lighter the air felt. The trees opened into a view I hadn't seen in years, the still water, the faint shimmer of sunlight rippling across it. The house stood freshly painted, its porch repaired, windows open to let in the sound of wind through cedar branches. It smelled faintly of varnish and new beginnings. Carla stepped inside first, setting down a small box. "It feels like an ending," she said. "No," I replied, running my hand along the smooth banister. "Just corrected math." She raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "I spent years adding everyone else up," I said. "It was time to balance the equation." She laughed softly. "You always did prefer order." "Not order," I said, looking out through the glass doors to where the lake shimmered under a pale sun. Peace. We stood there a long while, Ava and Ethan carrying supplies in, their laughter faint in the distance, David's car pulling up along the drive. For once, no one was arguing. Carla exhaled slowly. You did it, Maggie. Did what? Built something that outlived bitterness. I smiled, stepping onto the porch. The lake reflected the sky in perfect stillness, silver, endless, forgiving. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. Peace, I whispered. And this time, it didn't sound like a wish. The morning of the event arrived soft and bright, a rare, golden kind of Seattle day that felt like the world had agreed to behave. The lake stretched wide and silver under the sunlight, the water barely moving except for the occasional ripple that reached the dock and disappeared again. The lake house had never looked so alive. Tables stood neatly on the porch, covered in linen and wildflowers from the garden. The scent of cedar mingled with fresh coffee and something sweet baking in the oven. Carla moved through the crowd like she'd been born hosting events. Keep the speeches short, she warned me. Philanthropy doesn't survive boredom. I smiled. Neither does truth. Guests arrived. Students, nurses, local donors, the first recipients of the Hawthorne Foundation's caregiver scholarships. Some were shy. Others carried the confidence of people who finally had permission to hope. Ava handled the sign-in table with grace beyond her years. Ethan helped carry trays from the kitchen, sleeves rolled, tie crooked, a grown man in the body of someone still learning humility. By noon, the porch was full. Laughter, murmurs, the gentle clink of glass. The lake reflected all of it, like memory choosing to forgive. When Carla called for attention, the noise settled to a low hum. She gestured toward me. Before we begin, a few words from the woman who taught us that quiet doesn't mean weak. It just means patient. Applause rippled through the air. I stood steady but unhurried, the microphone cool in my hand. Thank you, I said, my voice even. The Hawthorne Foundation started small, just a drawer full of ideas and a memory of what it felt like to be overlooked. We've grown into something larger than I imagined. And that's because of you, the people who saw value where others only saw convenience. Faces lifted toward me, some smiling, some wiping at their eyes. Near the back, David and Lori sat close together, not speaking, hands clasped beneath the table. Their expressions were soft, tired, and full of the kind of sorrow that doesn't beg for forgiveness. It simply carries it. Then Ethan stepped forward, clearing his throat. I'd like to say something, he said, glancing at me for permission. Go on, I said, handing him the mic. He stood before the crowd, shifting slightly but standing tall. I didn't understand what my grandmother was building when she started this. He began. I thought it was about money, or pride, but it's not. It's about giving people back the space to matter, even when others forget they do. The crowd went still. The boy who once measured worth in square footage was speaking in something closer to faith. She taught me that independence isn't leaving people behind, he continued. It's lifting them until they can walk beside you. Applause came. Gentle at first, then full. I saw Lori dab her eyes, David looking down, jaw tight. Carla caught my gaze across the porch and gave a single nod. Approval, without pity. When the clapping faded, she leaned toward me. You taught them dignity by living it, she whispered. I smiled. They tried to rent my space, I said quietly, so I built one they couldn't afford to lose. She laughed, the sound like glass catching light. And they'll spend the rest of their lives trying to buy back what you gave away for free. The afternoon stretched into comfort, speeches blending into laughter, coffee cups exchanged for wine glasses as the sun dipped low. Ethan and Ava led a small group down to the dock for photos. David approached once just to say, "The place looks beautiful, Mom." "Thank you," I said. "It always did. You just had to see it without entitlement." He nodded. No argument, just understanding. As the last guests left, Carla and I stood on the porch, watching the lights settle over the water. "It feels full circle," she said softly. "It is," I replied, "but not closed. Just quiet enough to start again." The lake mirrored the sky perfectly, pale gold fading into blue. I listened to the faint laughter echoing from the dock, to the whisper of wind in the pines, to my own heartbeat matching both. For years they called it my room, then they made it clear it wasn't. Now, as peace stretched across the water, I finally knew the truth. They said my room was available. Turns out they were just temporary guests in mine.